I know head coach Dennis Allen said that they won't do it, but the New Orleans Saints should absolutely be considering a quarterback change. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And this podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online and available to people worldwide. And they have a special offer just for you. Get 10% off of your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Tell you more about them a little bit later, but for right now, we're going to talk about the help that the New Orleans Saints need, particularly over on the offensive side. The New Orleans Saints drop a big game Monday Night Football to the Baltimore Ravens in, let's be honest, embarrassing fashion. And the impact of this loss could be felt for a while. This one could hang around for a while. I'll tell you why. But first, we're going to take a look at how the offense struggled versus pressure against the Baltimore Ravens defense and why the New Orleans Saints should be considering a change at quarterback. Dennis Allen, New Orleans Saints head coach, mentioned before, it was the Wednesday before the Las Vegas Raiders game, a game in which the New Orleans Saints pitched a 24-0 shutout, a very impressive and complete game by the team, but was followed up by a not-so-complete game or completely something else. It wasn't the game that it was against the Raiders. But that Wednesday beforehand kind of left the door open a little bit when he announced that Andy Dalton would be the starter, quote, moving forward. When he said that it's an offensive decision, that as long as the offense continues to produce the way that it has, that Dalton will be out there. Well, the New Orleans Saints offense did not produce, or well, they produced, but they didn't produce what you hoped that they would, with Andy Dalton at the helm on Monday night. The New Orleans Saints ended up struggling on third downs, 3 of 11 in this one, just 27%. They were 0 for 2 in the red zone, including some bad passes by Andy Dalton. Lost the turnover margin yet again, and they also lost the deficit when it came to time of possession by more than 15 minutes. That's right. The Baltimore Ravens offense possessed the ball for an entire quarter more than the New Orleans Saints offense did. Why? Because of that 27% third down rate and because of those turnovers, or that turnover as well. Several passes bad at the line of scrimmage, several questionable choices in terms of going to checkdowns immediately. 3rd and 3, throwing the ball to Juwan Johnson at the line of scrimmage, passing up on throwing the ball to Alvin Kamara in the flat in the red zone, and instead throwing a pass, or ended up getting sacked because he held on to the pass. Just more and more of sort of the questionable decisions that we've kind of seen and written off around Andy Dalton over the course of the past few weeks, and I, for one, am no longer writing them off. One of the things that I mentioned after that Las Vegas Raiders game, that was that 24-0 shutout, a fantastic game for Andy Dalton, a fantastic game for everyone that was involved in a New Orleans Saints uniform, was that I wanted to see if he could do it again. We saw it against the Cincinnati Bengals. We saw it in the bounce back game against the Las Vegas Raiders, but could we see it against a much better defense, and if we're being honest, a much better team in the Baltimore Ravens? And we saw the exact opposite. We saw a quarterback that folded under pressure. We saw a quarterback that failed to lead his team at the end of a first half, at the end of a game, and when the game was still manageable as well in the third quarter, that could not put drives away yet again in the red zone. The same thing that came back and bit them against the Cincinnati Bengals weeks ago, that kind of got better against the Raiders, but didn't really necessarily get better against the Raiders in terms of red zone possession. So we saw the New Orleans Saints kind of revert back to their old selves that we had seen with Andy Dalton at the helm over the course of the early season. False starts, holding penalties, a lot of shooting themselves in the foot and not being able to build any momentum, visibly frustrated players coming on and off the field. So to me, you see all of that, and it's very hard for me to see the value in sticking with an Andy Dalton at that point. And the only value would be staying true to your quarterback, which you could have done with Jameis Winston once he was healthy, after, of course, he dealt with the broken back and all these other things, or the back fractures and all the other injuries that he was dealing with. So for me, I think the New Orleans Saints should consider a quarterback change here, because Andy Dalton's not going to get the job done for you. He'll get the job done for you as long as everything around him is going perfectly, but he's not somebody that if you get into a 7-point hole even, that you feel very confident is going to be able to claw you out of that hole and dig you out. He doesn't have that sort of undefeatable mentality that, okay, well, as long as the Saints get a last possession within one score, then this team can still score, which is something that a lot of Saints fans are accustomed to, because that's what you had with Drew Brees for so long. And based upon what we saw against the Atlanta Falcons, the closest that you've had with that was Jameis Winston. Now, you don't want to repeat that cycle over and over again, of course, but having somebody at the quarterback position that can be a difference maker and that can make up a difference is key, especially when you've dealt with the injuries that the New Orleans Saints have dealt with this entire season. No more Michael Thomas for the rest of the season. Several injuries in this game that we'll discuss later that have the ability to have a ripple effect and impact far beyond the 24-hour rule. So for me, it's either make a change to Jameis Winston, make a change to Taysom Hill. Your season is on the verge of being over. It feels like a 2-game lead, or a 2-game sort of falling behind 2 games in the division right now for the New Orleans Saints, makes it feel like they're completely out of contention for the division. And technically right now, they're still only a game behind. So even at 3-6, which is one of the worst starts that they've had over the course of the first 9 games since like 2005, this team is somehow very much still in it thanks to the horrific play around the entire division. But that's not going to last for very long. It's simply not going to last for very long. So you have got to make a decision that makes this team better, because as of right now, you have a decision that makes the team produce better, but you don't have a decision, and you haven't made a decision yet, that allows this team to win games. And that has to be paramount over yards, over points, all of those things. You can score points and lose games. You can gain yards and lose games. Get the guy out on the field that's going to win you games. And if you think that's Andy Dalton, then that's fine. But so far, what we've seen out on this field here at the Caesars Superdome, that's not who Andy Dalton is. And so find somebody, whether it's on your roster or you make a desperate plea with some free agent to end up somewhere. Obviously, you're not going to find a free agent at this point. That's just me kidding. But you got to figure it out. You have to. And right now, there's a lot riding on Dennis Allen and his opportunity to have a second year as a New Orleans Saints head coach. Because let's face it, you're not going to move on from a head coach in the middle of his first year. Then if you do that, you're going to go years without being able to attract a head coach ever. You're going to run into trouble with that, because that's just a stain on your organization when you do something like that. But it's getting really, really tough to advocate for a second year for Dennis Allen with the decisions that are being made around quarterback and the other things that are going on here as well, including a defense that is not the defense that we expected it to be. Now, this was a defense that was out on the field for 15 minutes more than its offense. So there are some things to discuss there, which we'll get to later on in the week. But for right now, I want to discuss why this New Orleans Saints team struggled so much on the offensive side, particularly against pressure. And a lot of it comes down to Andy Dalton, but there are a couple of other specifics that we should break down as well. We'll have that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Don't you just wish that life had like a user manual that just kind of helped you problem solve, figure things out on your own, troubleshoot, if you will? Well, getting a user manual for life, that's just simply not going to happen. But hey, the next best thing is probably BetterHelp. BetterHelp Therapy Online. Everyone deserves to feel their best, and BetterHelp absolutely makes it easier to get that process started. I believe very strongly in therapy. I use BetterHelp. I use therapy. And one of the reasons why I decided to do it through BetterHelp, even though I've done it through more traditional channels in the past, is simply because first of all, it's affordable, it's accessible, but also it's 100% online, which makes it a lot easier for me as well. It's all the business of all the sort of benefits of in-person therapy, but instead it's more convenient. And all you have to do to get it started is fill out a short survey. And this is probably my favorite part, like a little questionnaire. And what BetterHelp does is that they pair you up with a therapist that's a good match for you. And if that therapist actually doesn't work out, it's free to change. So it's just so much easier. You don't have to deal with traffic. You don't have to deal with any of the searching for the right therapist. BetterHelp takes care of all of it for you so that you can focus on being your best self. You don't have to focus on the other stuff. So get unstuck, right? Go and check it out. BetterHelp. And you're going to be able to learn more here and save 10% off of your first month by going to betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. The New Orleans Saints struggled quite a bit against the Baltimore Ravens defense, and one of the biggest pieces that they struggled against was pressure. Why did that happen? Let's break it down. I appreciate you, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. And as always, make sure you go for your second listen today and check out Locked On Sports today, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts. I'm on it today with Peter Bukowski, speaking a little bit on this New Orleans Saints season, which is not the New Orleans Saints season that we expected. So you can find that on this app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Once again, that's Locked On Sports today. The New Orleans Saints offense struggled quite a bit against the Baltimore Ravens defense, and it's not super surprising that they did. One of the biggest question marks was the New Orleans Saints going to be able to get a run game going to help to complement the passing offense so that they can, kind of not get one-dimensional. The issue for the New Orleans Saints is that they did get one-dimensional. So pressure became very effective, became very impactful. Why is that? One of the reasons is that the Baltimore Ravens ended up getting to a point, because of the deficit that they created by holding the New Orleans Saints offense from being able to put points on the board, and the New Orleans Saints offense kind of shooting itself in the foot, not being able to get going. We all know what happened. But they were able to create that deficit, and they were able to eliminate the run game. So what does that do? That means that if you can't run the ball, then eventually you're going to have to pass the ball, especially when you end up in that deficit, that hole that you have to then claw yourself out of. You're going to need the passing game. So that allowed guys like Mike Macdonald and the Baltimore Ravens defense to be able to just pin their ears back and come after Andy Dalton. And it worked. It worked really, really well. In fact, there wasn't really a lot of stuff to where the New Orleans Saints misdiagnosed things. There was one to where Cesar Ruiz and Ryan Ramczyk on the right side both went to block the guy that was a little bit toward the inside, and Ryan Ramczyk had somebody just go completely untouched around the edge. There was another one in the red zone with Marlon Humphrey that was a sack that ended up being a situation to where the Ravens just sent more than the Saints had back to block, right? And so, those aren't misdiagnosis things. That's you've got one more guy rushing and the quarterback can't get the ball out quickly. And that, I think, is one of the other things, is that Andy Dalton, and feel free, I'm not looking at the numbers yet because we have to go through all the advanced analytics process and all this other stuff, but just watching the game, you could see that Andy Dalton held onto the ball for a long time in these. And some of that's the coverage by the Baltimore Ravens. We are talking about Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters, who was mad, by the way. Marcus Peters was on the Baltimore Ravens sideline, angry at John Harbaugh and stuff. And I'm sitting there going, does he know that they're winning? What? But that's just kind of fire that you're not seeing from the New Orleans Saints that you're seeing from the Baltimore Ravens. So who am I to say, hey, why are you doing that? Because maybe that's just the fire that these guys have, right? So anyway, you didn't really see the quick release. Last week against the Las Vegas Raiders, the Saints, Andy Dalton got the ball out in 2.38 seconds. I'm gonna wager that it took him longer to get the ball out of his hands on a snap-by-snap basis in this game against the Baltimore Ravens. I'm going to bet I'm not wrong on that. Now, I could be, but I'm going to bet I'm not. And we'll revisit that. The analytics will come out on Tuesday. So this is the Tuesday episode, and so this will come out probably. I'll be able to update that on Wednesday. But the other thing is that Andy Dalton had a 116.7 passer rating against the blitz, and that is definitely not what we saw today. He was a lot more flustered in the backfield. He was a lot more flustered and thrown off by blitzes. And some of that just has to do with the pressure packages. I mean, one of the things that we talked about is that the Baltimore Ravens don't blitz as much as you would expect a Wink Martindale disciple-led defense to blitz. But when they do, they get pressure. It's effective. And some of that is choosing the right moments. Late in what they call long and late downs, like 3rd and 10, stuff like that. And then the other piece is that when they get pressure, they get sacks. You saw Justin Houston with 2.5 sacks. Justin Houston's had an incredible season so far, but you also saw Calais Campbell with a sack. You saw Marlon Humphrey with a sack off the edge. So these are the things that the Baltimore Ravens have consistently done well. And this is the example of why it's so important that when you get to the quarterback to bring him to the ground. It's something that the Saints struggled with tonight. Now, let's be real. Tackling Lamar Jackson is a much different task than tackling Andy Dalton, who got clobbered at one point by Calais Campbell. So the Saints have a long way to go if this is the actual baseline. And that's the really interesting question to me. Is the Las Vegas Raiders game the baseline and then the Ravens game one that just knocked you down from there? Or is this Ravens game the baseline for the New Orleans Saints and the Raiders just made you look better? If it's the latter, that's a lot of trouble for a long time because the Saints are about to experience this again. They're going to go up against a putrid Pittsburgh Steelers team and then come home to host an NFC champion, a Super Bowl champion Los Angeles Rams team who, albeit hasn't looked as great as anyone expected them to in 2022, but neither did the Ravens until they stepped into this building. So are the Saints in a situation where they were victims of their own mirage just a week ago, and are they about to be victims of their own mirage again next week or the week after next based upon whatever next week's performance is in Pittsburgh? What's the real baseline for the New Orleans Saints? And you know what? You have to win the games. That's what it is. You have to win the games. So whether this is your baseline or that was your baseline, regardless, you got to find a way to either stick with what worked before and make it happen again and replicate that success, or make sure that you are improving from this point moving forward. Because again, that window, closing. All right, coming up next, this is a loss whose impact will be felt well beyond the 24-hour rule. Why is that? I'll tell you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. First, I want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks, daily fantasy made easy. And as I continue to say, the way that if you put all of the world's greatest minds into one room together and said, create daily fantasy, this is exactly what would come up. And I don't just mean fantasy football. They've got football, but they've also got basketball, college hoops, men's and women's. They've also got WNBA. They've got MLB. They've got NHL. They've got, what's the weird one that they have that I absolutely love? Oh, disc golf. So if you're a big disc golf person, Prize Picks is the way to go. All you have to do is pick 2 to 5 players, athletes, competitors, and choose whether or not they're going to come out at more or less than their Prize Picks projection. You get those right, and you can win up to 10 times your entry back. And right now, Prize Picks is also giving first-time users a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100 by using the promo code LOCKED on. All you have to do is head over to prizepicks.com or use the Prize Picks app today. Drop that code locked on. You get a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100. So you can put $100 down, get a match of $100. You want to do a little less, that's fine. $50, they'll give you $50. Just that simple. All you have to do is use the promo code locked on at prizepicks.com or on the Prize Picks app today so you can start playing daily fantasy sports. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a look at how this New Orleans Saints loss to the Baltimore Ravens is one that's going to be impactful for far beyond the 24-hour rule. This one's going to have some ripple effects that end up impacting the rest of the New Orleans Saints season. So what do I mean when I say that it's going to be beyond a 24-hour rule? What's a 24-hour rule, Ross? Well, generally, sort of typically, the culture of the NFL is to give yourself 24 hours to either feel a win, be excited about it, feel a loss, be upset about it, and then you have to just shut all that off and kind of turn your focus to the next game. So, for instance, tonight through tomorrow evening on Tuesday, the Saints team will sort of feel this loss, and then come Wednesday morning, basically, they're full steam ahead to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're not thinking about this game anymore. They're going to Pittsburgh. They're trying to figure out how they can win that game and keep their NFC South division hopes alive. The issue is that in this game, the New Orleans Saints sustained injuries to several key players in a same week in which they already lost wide receiver Michael Thomas for the season, and again failed to get Jarvis Landry healthy enough to be out on the field in this game. New Orleans Saints have done a good job so far in reducing soft tissue injuries, which is what they brought in Matt Rhea to do, but are still absolutely decimated by injuries of different kinds. Impact injuries, broken this, broken that, sprained this, sprained that, twisted this, twisted that, right? Dislocated this, dislocated that. So for the Saints, they lost linebacker Pete Werner, defensive end Marcus Davenport, as well as starting center Erik McCoy. Those are three key players for you as you go through. Now, Marcus Davenport is one that you can look at and say, okay, the Saints are kind of used to him dealing with injury, so they know how to fill him in. Peyton Turner's really come on these last couple of weeks, although he got rocked by a running back at one point during this game, but also made some really nice plays. I think a lot of I didn't really focus on the defense in this episode. I will on Wednesday, but I think a lot of what the Saints defense struggled with, particularly later in the game, was just being exhausted. I mean, having the Baltimore Ravens possess the ball for an entire quarter longer than the Saints offense did, that's exhausting for the New Orleans Saints defense. So we keep that in mind. But I mean, those are some big time key players. So if you're struggling with keeping pressure out of the backfield, losing Erik McCoy doesn't help you there. And that's not going to get any better if that ends up being a longer term or even a short term injury. It's still going to have an impact on your season, right? Same thing with Pete Werner, who has been, aside from Alvin Kamara, probably your most consistently great player all season. From game 1 to game 9, he has been your most consistently great player on the defensive side. I think, of course, you always put Demario Davis in that category, but Pete Werner has been in just sort of a league of his own. I mean, he's leading the NFL in solo tackles. He's been outstanding in coverage in the run game and pass pressure. Right, he's been a good pressure player as well. I mean, the guy's done everything, and it's his second year. He's still developing, so he's still got more to do. But if you end up losing him for an impactful amount of time, I mean, he was carted off the field, or not off the field. Sorry, he went to the injury tent, and he was carted from the injury tent to the locker room. So it could have been precautionary. It could have been, hey, don't walk on that. Don't make it worse. It's okay now. Let's not risk making it worse. Let's get you back and then get the procedure that we have to get done. Let's get it taped up, wrapped up, whatever it might be. I don't know. But if that ends up being let's just call it on average, Saints players right now who are injured are missing like 5 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks. Geez, I mean, without those guys for 2 weeks and your season might be over by the time that you get back. That's rough. That's really, really rough for this New Orleans Saints team. So, yeah, they lost to the Baltimore Ravens Monday night. They're going to have their 24-hour rule. They're going to feel this for a little while. Then they're going to turn their attention to Pittsburgh and next guy up and all that other stuff. I understand that. I get all of that. But, yikes. I mean, those are bread and butter guys for this team. And that's one of the other reasons why, and I'm sorry, there's probably some Andy Dalton fans out there that are just so tired of me saying this, but that's one of the other reasons why I kind of advocate for the quarterback change. You have some bread and butter players that ain't going to be able to be on the field for you, and that means that the defense is going to be impacted. That means that the offensive line is going to be impacted. So is Andy Dalton really the guy that's going to be able to help you overcome that when he hasn't been able to show that he can overcome a single score deficit so far? Think back to the Cincinnati Bengals game. Think back to the Minnesota Vikings game. Well, no, let me give him credit for the Minnesota Vikings game, because at least he, with Chris Olave, got within 61 yards of a field goal, right? So I guess there's that. And then before that, the drive before that got within 60 yards of a field goal, but you still had to ask your kicker to do something that you wouldn't usually ask your kicker to do, which is go out there and kick a 60 and 61 yard field goal to try to tie and then tie again, or take the lead and then tie again. So the impact of this loss is going to be felt for a little while, y'all. And it stinks. It really, really stinks. And I know it's getting harder and harder to kind of trust that this team is going to be able to find a light at the end of the find a light at the end of the tunnel and really pull out of this one and be, a team that gets to even just a postseason appearance without even discussing the idea of a postseason win. But right now, this New Orleans Saints team, before they can even think about the playoffs, which are still a possibility for this team, I know, but before they even think about that, they got to think about winning games. Winning this week, winning the week after, and stringing together at least 2 wins in a row. I mean, goodness. And I think one of the ways that you do that is by shaking things up. I don't think that there's a reality in which you blow things up at this point in the season. Also, we know that blowing things up doesn't usually work, but I think you got to make some kind of change here. And the quarterback position is probably the easiest place to do it. So it's interesting note to follow up. And we'll follow up, in interviews and all that stuff here throughout the week. All right, coming up tomorrow, we'll take a deeper dive into this game. We'll get into some of the deeper analytics. What was that time to throw? How often was Andy Dalton pressured? And where did the New Orleans Saints defense struggle, even though we know that a lot of it had to do with fatigue, particularly in the run game. So we're going to break all of that down and look at how the New Orleans Saints can rebound from this and hopefully get a win next week in Pittsburgh. Of course, I'll be out in Pittsburgh as well for that game. So we'll break all that down in tomorrow's episode. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to also go and check out Locked On Sports Today. I made an appearance today, so you can hear me speak a little bit for a couple of minutes on this loss for the New Orleans Saints and what it means for them moving forward. And why I don't think the New Orleans Saints should regret their offseason choices at all in terms of what they did do. Let me be very clear about that. So we'll break all of that down for you over on Locked On Sports Today. And there's, of course, more for you here every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Appreciate you, as always, for making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. Big shout out to the young legend Aries for coming out and making sure I got to say hi. Shout out to you as well, Carla and Lance. Appreciate everybody who took the time to say hi here at the game Monday night. As always, if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.